Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome from the island of Rab. So you have this nice scenery, and I hope the network, which I had trouble before joining in this Zoom meeting, will not bother us in the forthcoming 60 minutes. Thank you all for coming. I can't see you, and our panelists will not be able to see you. So we are speaking, or I'm speaking in the black screen, hoping that you can see us and hear us. I'm speeding up because we have 4 excellent panelists for today's discussion on human rights, media freedoms, and civil liberties during the pandemic. So the topic of our discussion is post-COVID or post-democracy Balkans. I think neither are. Before our panelists speak, just as a moderator, I use the freedom to say that I don't think we are post-COVID yet, and certainly post-democratic we are not, because I don't think we have ever been fully democratic, but this is maybe just my flavoring, seasoning for the discussion that is coming up. We have Vuk Velebit as independent political analyst specializing in Serbia, EU, and Russia relations. I also see that he's experienced in civic protests, so maybe he will be able to share also some of that experience. Stefani Spirovska is president of the Youth Educational Forum in Skopje. So welcome, Stefani, to you also. Mario Mažić is a good friend, all-time friend. We have started working when Mario was in the Croatian Youth Initiative, and now I introduce him as a founding partner at Europe&Southeast in Petrinja in Croatia, and also program advisor at PeaceNexus Foundation in Switzerland. And last but not the least is Agnesa Qerimi. She's program manager at Foundation 17 in Prishtina. I will read also the questions, so I will say the questions that we expect our participants to reflect or to choose some from, and there are basically 3. The first one is that, in your opinion, what are the most significant challenges for human rights, as I said, media freedoms and civil liberties in the region today? How to protect these rights? And which tools to use, and what is the role of NGOs and civil sector in this respect? Vuk, I suggest we start with you, and then we continue to our other panelists. Just one last technical remark. I will try to keep the time. We will go now for approximately 30 minutes. Please, you have option Q&A tab on your screen. Pose your questions. You can indicate whether it is to all panelists or just specific person. Use this opportunity, so we want, in order for all of us to have a dynamic and productive discussion. Vuk,
thank you, Senada, for this very kind introduction, and thank you for having me today on this call. As you already said, I'm not sure, like when we talk about democracy in Western Balkans region, how to define the current status and the phase of democracy we are living in all today in Western Balkans region. And it's really hard to define, is this post-democracy? Because I'm not sure if we ever had like consolidated democratic societies. I would say that we have always been like in front of world trends. If you see all the populist movements around the globe and what is happening with democracies, civic liberties and media freedoms, I think that we, in some way, our political leaders predicted what would be world trends, like I would say 10, 20 or 30 years ago. What we have witnessed in Serbia during this pandemic crisis is that civic liberties and media freedoms were additionally endangered. One of our journalists from Serbia was even arrested because she wrote about the status of medical equipment in some clinical centers in Serbia, and it was very, I would say, that our government, they didn't think about that move and what reaction would be. Also, during this crisis, we had like a new wave of protests in Serbia, especially in Belgrade, where people on their balconies were protesting, not just because of the curfew. That wasn't the main reason, but the main reason was like the whole atmosphere we are living in, because Serbian society was additionally polarized in last few months. We are having elections in 10 days. And what we saw after Serbian government finished their like process of special measures because of pandemia, was that we had like gathering of like thousands of people organized by ruling party in Serbia, and that was happening in front of Serbian parliament, where we witnessed even physical attacks of supporters of Vučić against one of opposition supporters in front of National Assembly. And all that is basically the consequence of that strong polarization of Serbian societies. On the other hand, I would say that there is no big difference in terms of what were like the status of civic liberties and media freedoms before and after the pandemic. I think that in Serbia we just have like a continuity of how the government and ruling party how do they behave to the journalists, what is the status of media freedoms, and I think that in next period we would witness more. I would say if there is no dialogue between political parties and if there is no like debates on state television and other TV programs, that polarization will be even stronger. And I'm really afraid that if different stakeholders, political groups, and all other relevant groups in our society, if they don't start talking to each other, that we would witness additional like physical attacks or some other things I wouldn't like to see on streets of Belgrade and Serbia. Mm-hmm. So if I would have to say like in one sentence, what is the how the Serbian society looks like after this pandemic crisis, I would say that Serbian society is polarized more than ever, and that it will even deepen that polarization if political parties don't start talking to each other.
Okay, thank you, Vuk. I think this issue of polarization is very interesting one, and if I understand you correctly, you are saying that pandemic contributed to further polarization in Serbia. And now with the forthcoming elections, I think it's going to be very interesting in which way things develop. It's also interesting that you said that being a forefront at all global events, I heard someone saying that President Trump is the first Balkan American president. So we are exporting also some values in the world if one understands it in this way. Thank you. We'll I'm sure you will have opportunity to say more later on. But now, Stefani, please let's hear what is your view of events in North Macedonia, especially now when I see that there is a rapid rise of newly infected people in Macedonia in the last week. So how do you assess the whole pandemic situation from the start, but also including these latest developments?
Hello from my side as well, and thank you a lot for the invitation. We usually do these debates in live, like in different places, because we want to show what's the situation in the Balkans at the time. But now we're like, we also changed our functioning. When we talk about if we're in a post-COVID or post-democratic Balkans, I would definitely agree that's neither, because we for a while thought that we were a post-COVID society because we started relaxing the measures and we just like got some hope that things were going on better, but then we realized that the numbers were rising again. So now we have about 100 cases in each of the past days. So the last number today was 87, so that's still very serious. That's one way to see it, but if you see it in another way, the number from the total people tested and the total cases are still 10%. So more or less the situation is same. However, we kind of feel more scared now because it's not going by as fast as we hoped that was going to happen. All in all, this crisis, it's something that shows us the weak spots of our society, I would say, because this is the times when we see how fragile our civil responsibilities are. So the level of being aware of each one's role in the society, it's not on the level it should be in order to combat the situation that is happening. Mm-hmm. So, for example, if we talk about the respecting of the measures, it was a great time for the society to start like dividing again on ethnic background, to blame the others for not respecting the measures more than our ethnic group, and then to like open some questions that weren't really addressed in the right way in the years before this. The educational system suffered a lot in this period because it was forced to stop the regular working, so it was all transferred digital as it's happening in all of the other countries. But then again, the quality wasn't as good as in some other examples. So we also suffered from bad quality of education in this at these times. Another thing that was very crucial for the way the situation was being handled was the resilience of fake news. So we have, like in general, very low percentage of recognizing fake news. That's one way to put it. So people were like easily drowned from news that were like the virus does not exist, or only one part of the population can get it, and then the young people are really like resilient to the virus and they cannot get it. So there were like a lot of fake news and also misconceptions, I would say, that in the public narratives. So all in all, this is like one perfectly great time to see what are all the weak spots within the entire system. So I think that once we start to create our new normal, that this is the great time when we should reflect on, because this is what our real situation looks like. So the fragile democratic values, the lack of quality of education, then the not really finished process of interethnic integration, and the fake news resilience as one very important segment of this of these times. So that would be like for the short introduction, and then we can go into that. But in general, the situation is like that, nor post-COVID nor post-democratic, I would say.
Thank you, Stefani. I think it's very comprehensive and very, very important how you explain the fragility of the society and this ethnic element, the impact of pandemic on the interethnic relations, and especially what you said, that some people believe that only some people can get it, and how it goes. So mutual accusations, and then probably the stigma that is linked to certain parts of population or ethnic groups. in relation to COVID, and then educational elements I'm sure we'll be able to discuss later, and the fake news and all kinds of conspiracy theories that are circulating around on the origin and then the purpose of the pandemic. So thank you for the brief and comprehensive introduction, Mario. Sorry, let's hear from you. I unmuted myself and muted too early. So I'll unmute now myself, and please.
Thank you. Well, I think I've learned a lot from the responses of panelists already, and I very much agree with their assessment of the situation. So what I would like to add is just to say that in my view, we've been speaking about the shrinking space for civil society for quite some time, for several years now, particularly. And I think what we're seeing is that a situation with the pandemic is amplifying the issue of the shrinking space for civil society. I definitely share the assessment that this is not the end of our dealing with the COVID pandemic. We're still to see where that goes, and hopefully we've learned from at least the first wave, both on what specifically the challenges are and what works in dealing to flatten the curve, to stop the spread of the virus. But on the other question, on post-democratic, here I particularly agree with what was said before. In the Balkans, we did not experience fully liberal democracies, and the situation with the COVID, where we are supposed to have a lot of trust in institutions as they basically deploy the kinds of measures that limit our freedoms and our rights, is a problematic situation in the social context where trust towards the governments is low, but where it's low because it's founded. Because we see that the governments in the region are trying to use the crisis for their political benefit. We see it in Croatia with rushing into the elections. We see it in Serbia very clearly with Vučić's regime. I think it's appropriate to start calling it a regime almost, and I think we'll explain that very well. But I would like to say a few things about the wider sort of geopolitical situation that we're facing, especially as civil society in the region. What we've seen recently, and what I'm saying that at least in effect is amplified by the COVID pandemic, is that the US is resigning the position of a global leadership of the global West, the progressive West, the West advocating for liberal democracies, for political systems where individual rights and liberties are the foundation of political organizing. And this is both on a symbolic and a tangible level, bringing a lot of concern for the civil society. Regionally, also, we see tensions, like, for example, that report in The Hill from, I think, a couple of months ago, where that shows how Ambassador Grenell is basically bullying Kosovo in a way that's not particularly supportive. There's another issue that I spoke about before, and that's the issue of the European People's Party and Angela Merkel giving basically political endorsements to the kinds of leaders in the region who can be equated with the notion of corruption and leading politics not on the basis of public interest. She's been consistently supporting Vučić. She's been consistently supporting the Croatian Democratic Union. So the right-wing nationalist political leaders who we know have a lot to do with corruption and low level of political development. We see Russia and China using the crisis to come in in the region, and also aided by the political leaders such as Vučić when he's overclaiming the support coming from China and underclaiming the support coming from the West largely, and more particularly from the European Union. And we see in the European Commission several trends that are not encouraging for civil society at all. For example, Vuk mentioned the case of Anna, the journalist in Vojvodina, who was taken into custody for her reporting. Well, the organization that she's affiliated with, the Independent Journalists Association of Vojvodina, that I also have a honor basically to work with, they point to how the European Commission just says every year there is no progress in view of media freedoms, and that's not true. There is no progress, but there is regress, and that needs to be noted and acknowledged, and the European Commission fails to do so. When it comes to Croatia, for example, we recently had a case where the European Commissioner tasked with the democratization, the democracy portfolio, Dubravka Šuica, called the local television to complain about negative reporting, and then the spokesperson of the European Commission stood in defense of such an attack on media on behalf of a European commissioner. I would also like to draw everyone's attention on a report that was just today published by GONG, one of the leading civil society organizations in Croatia, certainly. I'm sharing the link now in chat with all the attendees and panelists, where they show how the governments are using, and particularly in the case of Croatia, EU funding to basically bureaucratically overburden civil society organizations so as to deter them from exercising their relevant social functions. And what they claim in this report very much corresponds with my experience, and I can claim it corresponds to the experience of many people in civil society that I worked with. Also, we see the inability of the European Commission to ensure respect for European values internally. We saw it in the case of Poland, we saw it in the case of Hungary, also in the case of Croatia. So I think these all are relevant context elements that show towards a trend that shrinks the space for civil society, and is now amplified by the pandemic, because there is, although civil society organizations are adaptable and they show that they can still implement meaningful initiatives and programs at the time when we have so many restrictions around for movement and for assembly and so on, I think that this still shows significant challenges and how the current crisis brings additional challenges for civil society organization, and then amplifies this negative trends, then resulting in an even more narrowed space for civil society organizations to do meaningful work in promoting reconciliation, peace and democratization, government accountability, and those sorts of things in the Balkans.
Thank you, Mario. I expected nothing less, and then opening up the box to also not speak only from the region, but to look at the broader European space. And actually, you went transatlantic in terms of America retracting from its defender or liberal democracy, but very important. And this is why I think we are calling this new generations of voices, or young voices from the Balkans. From all your interventions, I think you have this ability to expand or to have a broader view of what is happening in particular countries or in our region, to understand and connect with broader trends in Europe. I think it is, and the European Union, which is to us the most important axis that these countries are linked to in terms of political, economic, social reforms and changes. We are missing Agnesa. because she has unstable connection. So pending her return to this discussion, I would like, and we don't have any questions, so to all our audience, if you have any questions for our panelists, please indicate so and write them. But maybe here at this moment we can continue our conversation. I would like to ask Vuk to comment on the upcoming elections in Serbia, and how do you, not what are the prospects, but just what is the atmosphere and how you assess the moment right now. We can also go back later to Mario to think about elections in Croatia that are also forthcoming, and then also Macedonia, what is happening there with elections. So
Thank you, Senada, for the question. I think that for the first time, I would say in last 30 years, we have a situation in Serbia that we know for sure, like, who will win the elections. But not only that, like, we had like those situations, like even during the 90s when Milosevic was in the power. But this is the first time that you don't have like the atmosphere of coming elections. You know, you don't have like TV debates, you don't have public gatherings, you don't have exchange of ideas and different policies how to solve some things. And politics is in Serbia today is completely moved like from institutional to very personal. And what we are seeing nowadays in Serbia is just personal battles of political leaders, both of like the government and the opposition. And really, since I vote I vote for the first time in 2012, and this is, I think, my fourth elections I have an opportunity to vote. But this time I have a feeling like that I'll be part of some theater if I go out to the voting station, because I know who will win the elections. I have an option to vote for, because a part of opposition is boycotting the elections, which I don't find very useful, and I don't think that's the best way to fight for political change. And on the other side, you have like many opposition parties that are actually in some way very collaborating with the government. And you have maybe only one political movement that is like truly opposition to the government. But even when thinking about them, you're not sure what you're voting for. So today, you actually don't have like a policy, and we have completely moved away from the politics, and we are just talking about political leaders and their personal interests. So I think that that this is a very, very unique situation, and that this, what we have today in Serbia, will have to change in coming years. And that the crucial thing is not just to ask, is not just to change the government, but we need another way of governing the country, and that really citizens have a feeling that the power, that all guys in power are there just to be your like administrative service and nothing more. And we have to start asking questions how to come to the situation to change the way of ruling the country, and what would be propositions. We need to see what political parties will offer in terms how Serbian society looks in 5 or 10 years, how our healthcare system looks like, how our schools looks like. I think that none of the politicians have the answers to those questions. So I think that the crucial would be after these elections, would be entering the new phase of politics in Serbia, where we would need to emphasize to get back to the politics and to talk about ideas in politics and not about just how to change the current government and to form some new one. We need another way of ruling the country.
Okay, a vision for Serbia in 2050.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, we have now several questions pending up, but I think this election question is really important. So I would like, Stefani, we know that elections were postponed in North Macedonia. Can you inform us what is the situation now and how do you assess it?
So basically, there were several plans of dates of the elections, but they were postponed several times indefinitely, and now we still have some proposals, but still nothing definite. So there is still strong political will for the elections to happen, but we still don't have a date. And if you ask me, at first, when all the political parties agreed to postpone the elections, indefinitely, that was very mature and reasonable and really expected, because the society did not have enough capacities to combat everything that's happening and organize elections at the same time minding the protective measures and enabling everyone to be safe on the election day. So that was one thing. So now still we only know that the elections are going to happen, but nothing has started by today. So it's just a discussion. But when we talk about democratic values, that's another thing that we need to educate young people about. It's about what to expect now. And when we talk about the education of young people in relation to the upcoming elections and upcoming processes, there are two things that should be really highlighted in the public discourse. And those are first, the importance of democracy at times like this. And the second thing is how to remain safe and how to take care of oneself when going on the elections to the polling station, if that takes place. Mm-hmm. Mario mentioned something about the civil society sector, which is, I agree. These are very challenging times for the civil society sector. And we as a sector mainly depend on the understanding of the donors, of the donor society, and how much they would understand the situation and how flexible they will be. So now there is an entire process of reframing of the CSO's work. So that's what's happening and what we're going through. And there were several very important initiatives that happened in North Macedonia, among which was one of 12 civil society organizations which worked on one document called Youth in Crisis. That was a document with emergency measures that should be taken from the institutions in order to at least guarantee some safety for the young people. There are still many problems like unemployment, like lack of quality of education, which I started to talk about. I saw that Adi asked a question about it. Maybe I can reflect on that later, not to mix the concept now. So yeah, there are plenty of, aspects of the young people's life that should be reflected on now. So that's what the civil society was also doing. And Youth Educational Forum, the organization where I work, we also worked on a document which was basically doing a timeline of all the changes that were happening in the higher educational institutions. So we were following that part, and we also had some recommendations on that as well. All in all, digitalization is still a problem. Whichever sector you could take a look at, digitalization is still a serious challenge, and that is reflecting a lot of processes altogether with civil obligations and being aware of one's role in the civil society. So that's very briefly. So Yeah,
thank you, Stefani. We have a question more specific to education, but let's just finish this round with elections, and then regarding digitalization, I think we are learning very fast. We may be lagging behind, but I think pandemic was really a fast learning track for all of us. Mario, elections in Croatia are in a month. Or less on the 5th of July. So how do you assess them?
Well, I'll just briefly say two things. I think what the government showed with rushing these elections in the situation of crisis and pandemic shows two things. One, they're afraid of the economic crisis that is probably coming after the pandemic, and they know that situations of economic crisis reflect badly on those in power. So they probably wanted to rush the elections in order to avoid loss of popularity in view of the imminent, basically, economic crisis. Second thing, much more dangerous in my view from the civic liberties perspective, is that by rushing the elections in a situation like this, they have significantly lowered the ability of the opposition to organize and to campaign. And I think this is an unfair treatment of the democratic political process by the ruling party. I think the elections could have been held a bit later, when we know more, when the opposition can have more time and better environment for organizing and campaigning. But on the positive side, I think this shows that a government is afraid of the possibility of losing its position, because they are aware of these issues and how rushing the elections is actually better for them than having them a bit later. So with that, I would just like to say that it shows an example of how government elites are using the crisis for their political benefit, are basically trying to navigate the situation now so to benefit politically of it. Rushing into the elections by the ruling party in Croatia is a sign of that.
Thank you, Mario. Stefani also mentioned these health-related issues or questions related to elections, and we know very well in Croatia that we were very cautious and very strict in applying them, and then once we decided that elections are forthcoming, then overnight they were relaxed and reinterpreted in a way that people are responsible, and that therefore elections can take place, and that there is no reason to postpone them, and so on and so on. But also playing here, we have questions related to education, to media, and this is something that I would like all panelists to reflect on. Stefani mentioned earlier, but you also on the role of media, fake news, conspiracy theories, and other things. But there is a specific question for Mario while you are still here. It's from Adnan. How do you comment the Bleiburg mess in Sarajevo? And what would be your advice from experience of Croatia? How should Bosnia and Herzegovina approach it?
I think Croatia should refrain from giving advice to Bosnia and Herzegovina and generally having too much impact on internal issues of Bosnia and Herzegovina. I think historically we can claim that it brought nothing good. I don't think Croatian political leadership has a constructive and friendship-based attitude towards Bosnia and Herzegovina. It's a completely different situation that we're facing. So on the advice that Croatia should give to Bosnia, I have no comment there.
I think the question was specifically on Bleiburg commemoration.
Same. Same, but I think when it comes to the issue of Bleiburg commemoration in Sarajevo, a few things there. As a human rights advocate, I think every person who was exposed to violence deserves our solidarity. I've found myself in situations that I was going to jail to visit people who are charged with committing war crimes to see whether their rights are respected in confinement. I do believe terrible people have human rights just as you and I do. That goes for the victims in Bleiburg and elsewhere by the partisans at the end and in the aftermath of the war. That being said, I think commemorating those victims needs to be contextualized. We saw it on the example of Germany, for example, when they commemorate Dresden bombings, they clearly say that this came because of the aggressive Nazi politics and criminal campaigns. Contextualizing what happened is key, because just saying these were innocent people killed by the evil partisans does not cut it. Secondly, I think, in that sense, I think everybody has the right to hold a mass or a commemoration for whoever they please, especially if they have family relationships and so on. But this was not it. This was a political stunt. Why Sarajevo, first of all? Why Sarajevo? Why not Zagreb? Why not elsewhere in Croatia? We know that in Austria they're unable to do it. But why not Croatia? Why do we have to export constantly Croatian extremism, basically, to Bosnia and Herzegovina? That's what happened with the Bleiburg mess, I think. And when it comes to the response from the Bosnian public to the mess, I think it showed that Bosnia actually has much more democratic potential that people give it credit for. It was a lively discussion. We saw Croatian organizations coming out to defend those protesting against the mess, which I thought was particularly important. And we saw basically people organizing to say, we see through this, we see that this is a political stunt and we won't have it in our city. So if I was a citizen of Sarajevo at the time, I would be proud of how Sarajevo's public basically reacted to this. But to underline, my view is that although everybody has the right to pay respects to anybody, especially persons who were exposed to unlawful violence, I do think we have to contextualize the things and see whether something is an honest commemoration to unlucky people, or it's a political stunt like this was in the case of this export of political extremism from Croatia to Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Thank you, Mario. I think this is very point. Why very clear, very clearly you say what you think, and I think I fully agree in respect, but not to go further down this line, although we could have a whole discussion on this. Agnesa is missing. She's not going to be able to join us. She sent her talking points, so I will pick a few and share them. In the meantime, we had a question related to Kosovo-Serbia relations and the issue of Kosovo independence. How does it affect the pandemic and post-pandemic future? And you can quickly reflect on this, whether the dialogue or Serbia-Kosovo relationship, how is it in the pandemic, and do you see the future?
Can I start?
Yes, please.
So I think basically that nothing crucially changed during the pandemic, nor it would change after pandemic crisis. I think that at this moment, international community that they have much bigger problem, I would say, on the side of Kosovo than on the side of Serbia in terms of establishing dialogue and like that political chaos. If you can imagine that Kosovo is bigger than in Serbia at the moment, because in Serbia it's at least it's predictable who will be like the leader and who will be sitting on side of Belgrade side of table, and I honestly I don't expect that something big will happen by the end of the year, even though there are some rumors that Americans are that they would like to see some solving the issue of Kosovo, like the relations between Serbia and Kosovo. But I think that if Vučić for last 8 years, if he hasn't done anything crucial to overcome the situation, I don't think that he will deliver something in the next months, especially because he knows in which way that would affect his political position in Serbia, yeah, I'm not optimist when it comes to resolving the relation between Serbia and Kosovo.
Thank you, Vuk. I will probably not do justice to what Agnesa wanted to say. She sent her talking points, but I can't read everything to you now. Her main points were related to education in Kosovo during pandemic. And I think what she would want to highlight is that human rights were not respected adequately in many ways during the pandemic. And then listing all the reasons why she would say so, and that especially for children with low social economic background, and it's almost 23% of children living under poverty line in Kosovo. Many of them and then especially ethnic minorities, were not able to get internet access and have effective learning. Almost, well, she says 43% of those, and then 52% is that children did not receive sufficient learning during pandemic and online schooling. It's not here to questions, but this is just to share with you what she would have said to join us. Education for Stefani, and from Adi, what have we learned? Education, what has changed, and what can we carry with us for the future? Our lessons learned during the pandemic. And I apologize. My internet connection is unstable because I was just cut off from video.
No problem. As long as we can hear you good, I think that's okay. We're fine. So basically, there are several things we've learned from the process, but the first and most important thing is that all the changes within the educational system are going super slow, and we have to be very careful with everything we introduce to the educational system, every new approach, because whatever we introduce new, whatever new we do, that would reflect generations and generations of students. And most of the times, like this is not the only time, but the several times before this we've done any changes within the educational system, we've seen the results way too late. So I'm afraid that everything we do now or we don't get to do on time will reflect in maybe next year or the years after that, because that's when one can measure or assess what's been happening before. In general, the biggest problem so far has been the systematic support, and it's not only systematic support towards the students, but it's also a systematic support towards the professors, because most of them are, I would say, older and not that very it's not that easy for them to transfer online everything they have been doing offline their entire careers. And they also lack programs, they also lack technology, they also lack schools in general, lack technology and contemporary methods of studying. So there are plenty of things that we got to see that we were just used to turn a blind eye on during our everyday life. So we knew that our schools were not using the contemporary technology in order to give the chance to our students to learn as much as they can in comparison to other educational systems, but we were somehow pushing it through every academic year. We also knew that the academic world was not as developed as it could have been. So, for example, we still do not have one electronic library where one can go and can find online all of the data, all of the books they need for their either things they're writing, they're studying, or they just want to read something in their field of studies. So we still have students that are writing their thesis and their things for university and for finishing their degrees, and they do not have online libraries. So that's a challenge, and that's not a challenge that's new. That's a challenge that has existed for a while, but now more than ever we see how harmful that is for the quality of education. Further on, also the university professors are, to be honest, they are trying to help in the process, but we need to be strong when we advocate for the students' position now. So we need to, I would say, to be more loud that everything should be digitalized, at least now in times when we have more than 100 cases daily. So the problems are not new, I would say, but also we need to have strong will. We need to have experts on the field, because in the several, I would say 8 years, we've had more than 4 ministers of education, and that's really pushing everything back from the line, because once you have someone who knows the field, who works in the field, and who has set a team there of people who are experts in what they do, things will start going easily. But now we have a lot of changes in that field, and things are kind of tricky now. What is good is that there is will among the professors and among the students to accommodate to everything that's happening for now. But there is still lack of support, I would say, and knowledge and experience among the entire educational system for everything to go easily online. Mm-hmm. But I think that we need to think now more than ever in order to make that change. Thank you.
I think we have to, and we will, at least sharing Croatian experience in the short past 3 months that we can reflect on. For example, the elementary school education surprisingly well adjusted to changes, while the biggest problems are with universities. So obviously, depending on the country, things are different. We have 5 more minutes. And we have 2 questions for all 3 panelists. One is, do you think that there is a regional, or that there could be a regional approach to transitional justice regionally? And the second question is related to media. How do you assess the media role, or has media helped boost accountability, or instead fostered more polarization during the pandemic? So choose one or the other, and let's try to really fit within the 5 minutes that we have left. Vuk.
I would say I'm not an expert for transitional justice, but I'm not sure there were many initiatives, and I think that Mario for sure knows much better the situation and what were the initiatives and how successful or not successful they were when we talk regionally. But I think that there was a goodwill like from the non-governmental sector to work on that, but without support, honest support of the governments. When it comes to media and their role in furthering the polarization, I would say that media is for sure, I would say in Serbia, I can suppose that it is the same or the similar situation in other Western Balkan countries, that the main role of the media in last period is actually to further polarize the society. And they are doing pretty much the same as the politicians. So instead of trying to articulate different ideas and to get different political leaders to come to sit to the same table and to talk, they're not doing that, and they're not. They're actually just by some individuals and government, they are just polarizing the societies even further, which is not good. And I think that won't change in the near.
Okay, more unprofessionalism and polarization in your view, Mario?
Well, on bad media basically pushing forward the conspiracy theories and whatnot, and there's a lot of them, particularly online, but we also saw how critical media are in general, but especially in these sorts of situations. We saw journalists demanding answers to why these measures are so, and they really press the governments to come forward and explain and basically rationalize on the measures that they impose on the citizens. But also the media have contributed a lot to citizens' knowledge about the crisis and the situation and so on. And I think the situation really showed how critical the independent and professional media is generally for any society, but especially in a time of crisis. When it comes to transitional justice question, I actually don't think there's a non-regional and yet meaningful approach to transitional justice. We actually see it. We see the non-regional, the national approaches to transitional justice now, and what you have as an effect is Croatia basically refusing to prosecute or not really engaging in prosecution of war crimes. Serbia still failed to prosecute any high-positioned person from the Yugoslav People's Army to date, and Bosnian prosecution office left where they can either prosecute the very low-level direct perpetrators or Bosnians, so not Croats, not Serbs, or Bosniaks, not Croats, not Serbs, because they are they cannot reach them. The Bosnian judiciary cannot reach them. When it comes to establishing facts, you cannot determine what happened in Croatia without going into archives in Belgrade. You cannot determine what happened in Bosnia without going to archives in Zagreb, Belgrade, Podgorica, and so on. It simply cannot work if it's not a cross-border, if it's not a regional approach. Simply technically, what transitional justice entails cannot work if it's not regional, if it's not through cooperation. And then to add another layer to that, the layer of reconciliation, that absolutely cannot work if it's not cross-border in nature. Of course, it can work on a local level of heterogeneous communities where reconciliation is very much needed as well, and further investments in reconciliation are needed. But when it comes to the regional level, nor on transitional justice, neither on reconciliation can anything meaningfully be done, either without a regional approach as such or intense regional cooperation to support measures in countries. The question also referred to Albania, and that's a bit of a different situation, because Albania wasn't a part of the series of conflicts for the dissolution of Yugoslavia. The Yugoslav People's Army did not participate in conflicts there, but I think that if our societies decisively engage in transitional justice processes, there is a lot that we can learn from one another, and a lot that even countries with different contexts, such as former Yugoslav nations on one side and Albania on another, can learn from one another and can meaningfully support one another in the processes of transitional justice.
Thank you, Mario. I think we really should have a special session on the issue of transitional justice in Southeast Europe or Western Balkans, which then includes also Albania. Stefani, please.
So since I'm also not an expert in transitional justice, but I have some experience in projects related to that and some youth opinion regarding things that are related to transitional justice, I would say that doing it in a regional way is the only way we can do that, because as Mario mentioned, whenever one country does it, it goes into a direction that later on cannot be connected in the puzzle. So that's also my opinion. And when we talk about the role of the media, so far I think that the media has done a very important and very good job, I would say, at least in North Macedonia, without that part of the media that were kind of a generator for fake news. But that in comparison to the media that were doing quality reporting, that was an insignificant part, I would say. However, when we talk about media reporting and the role of media, I think that both the educational system and the civil society sector has a very strong thing that they need to do in front of them. So that's a big challenge that we need to work on, and that's on media literacy. So raising the level of media literacy will remain as a challenge in front of us. So that's the last thing I would like to share. I know that we're 3 minutes past the time when we needed to finish the discussion. So that would be from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefani. I was just typing an answer to a few more questions that we had. Unfortunately, we won't have time to answer them. One was for Vuk regarding the opposition in Serbia, another one on transitional justice. I can only repeat that I really think there should be a session with young voices related to the issue of transitional justice. I would like to thank you all for taking part in this discussion, and to all our audience and those who have joined us in the past hour. And please stay well, stay safe, stay happy. This discussion took place in the framework of the initiative Young Generations for New Balkans 2030, which is run by the International Institute for Peace, Karl Renner Institute, and the Austrian Institute for International Affairs. I greet you all. Stay fine and well. Goodbye.